everybody. So at this point, we've done a couple weeks of animating frame by frame. You guys have done some, we've done basic frame by frame animation in Adobe Animate. We've talked about 12 principles. You guys did some ball bouncing, kind of, practice concepts like squash and stretch and things like that. We've done some practice with walk cycles. Okay. So now what we're going to be doing is learning how to speed up the animation process. Okay. So, my goal for this semester, since this is really a continuation of the 10A animation course here at Chabot, is I want you guys to work on full animations. And to be perfectly honest, doing everything by frame is a lot. With one person, it's really difficult to be drawing that much. So over the next couple of weeks, we're going to learn how to speed up the animation process. And part of what we're going to be learning is how to use what are referred to as motion tween or tween animations. Okay. So we're going to be talking about that today and next week, which is going to help you hopefully speed up the animating process. One of the first things I want to talk about today, though, excuse me, I'm a little under the weather, is working with non-animate files. I talked about this a little bit with when you guys were drawing, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it more, which is that we can actually, over the last couple of weeks, we've always been using the drawing tools like the paintbrush and the pen tool within Adobe Animate to draw our characters, but we can actually draw our characters in other programs and then bring them in. So we can bring in vector files, and I talked about this a little bit. You can bring in stuff from Adobe Illustrator or something maybe like Figma, which is a vector program, and bring those in. And we did a little copying and pasting from Adobe Illustrator, but we can also actually bring in an AI file directly and bring it into Adobe Animate. And we can also bring in what are called raster files. Raster files are images that are comprised of pixels. This would be something like a JPEG or a PNG or a PSD file or something like that. And we can bring those, we can bring raster files into Adobe Animate, even though Adobe Animate is actually a vector-based program. Okay. So let's talk about that. So I'm going to go to the files for today. Let's open up the files for today. Baby, bobby, boom. All right, so I've given you guys a couple of files here. One's a vector file that's made outside of Adobe Animate. The other is a raster-based file. Remember, raster are pixel-based files. This is how something like Adobe Photoshop or Lightroom, or even if you're using like a simple photo editor on your phone to like add a filter to your photo, like an Instagram or TikTok or something like that. These are all raster-based. Okay. At this point, we actually haven't really brought raster based into Adobe Animate unless you imported like a reference photo. But Adobe Animate can import most standard raster based formats. That includes JPEG, PNG, GIF, I believe WebP, PSD files. Okay. I'm going to open up this PSD file. Chabot actually offers courses on how to work with Adobe Photoshop. So if you're not familiar with Adobe Photoshop, don't worry. You don't have to know anything about Adobe Photoshop to bring in a pixel-based photo. I'm just showing this because some people here do have experience. I just wanted to kind of go over that. So this is Photoshop. Native format of a Photoshop is a PSD file. Okay, I just want you to take a look at this composition, and I just have a couple of layers here. There's a background layer, a dog layer, and then a little hat layer. okay? And this is a raster-based composition. So if I zoom in, you can literally see the colored pixels that make up this document, okay? Each one of these is a colored pixel, whether brown or gray or beige or whatever. And when you add all of these pixels together, you get a composition, okay? So let's say I wanted to bring in this dog as a background image for my animation, okay? What I'm going to do is we're going to bring this into what is referred to as the Adobe Animate library, okay? So what is a library? Well, let's think about what a library is in real life. A library in real life is a place, usually it's a physical place, like a physical building. Normally, when we talk about a library, most people think of it as like a place where we store books, right? You have a bunch of books, they're organized on shelves, right? But a library really is just a collection of anything. You can have a collection of videos or movies, like a film library. You can have a collection of music, like a record library or something like that. So in Adobe Animate, we have a library, and that library is going to store imported elements, okay, which includes things like raster files that we bring into our project and vector files, okay. So I'm going to bring in the PSD file. This is my library. Currently, it's empty. And I'm going to go to File, Import, Import to Library, okay. This is going to bring the file directly into my library. And I'm going to go find the file. This is my PSD file. And I'm going to hit Open. Now, when it does this, this comes up and we get a couple of options. I'm going to go through some of the more basic ones. So first of all, we can actually, if you know anything about Photoshop, you know that Photoshop divides content into layers, okay? Those layers actually come through here, and you can decide if you want all of the layers or whether you want to individually turn them on or off. Next is the compression. This is how you want the files to be brought into Adobe Animate. There's an option here for either lossy or lossless. Lossy means that the files will be compressed a little bit. For smaller files, that could cause a little bit of compression artifacting. Lossless would be, have less compression errors or artifacting, but it also will make your final file a lot bigger. Okay, so you can decide whether that's important to you. The main thing here is under Convert Layers To. This means if you have layers, which I do, it's going to say, do you want them as animate layers, a single layer, or keyframes? Okay. For 99% of stuff, you're probably going to want these as animate layers. What this is going to do is it's going to maintain these layers when you bring this into Adobe Animate. So if I import these as animate layers, here are my layers individually being compressed, and then this is my item together. And if I edit this, you'll actually see I get those same layers within my element here, okay? I'm just going to delete this and let's try this again, just so you can kind of see the different options of what would have happened. If I had done the same thing, but brought this in as a single layer, it still would import it, but basically it would compress all of the layers into one layer, okay? That's not a huge difference, but you wouldn't be able to do things like turn off individual layers or lock layers if that's something you want to do. If you actually brought this in as the final option, keyframes, what this would actually do is every layer would become a keyframe. And if I do this, you can see that actually like the first layer becomes the first keyframe, the second layer becomes the next keyframe, and then so on and then so on. So it almost becomes like the layers are becoming like, keyframes in an animation timeline, which is probably not what you want. I'm assuming most of the time you probably just want to bring in the item as a full item and have, the ability to edit layers if you want to, to do that, I would strongly recommend that you keep it as animate layers. Okay. So let's do that. Bring that in. And then I can bring this into my project. You will not be able to edit anything that is raster based in Adobe Animate. So for instance, I would not be able to select and use, like, say, for instance, the eraser tool or anything like that, because these are vector-based tools. Vector tools do not work on a raster image. Okay. I would, though, be able to do some simple things like move it around using the position, doing things like scale, and being able to do things like rotate and things like that. Let's also import, I have an AI file or Adobe Illustrator file. Once again, if you don't know how to use Adobe Illustrator, it's okay. You don't have to know anything about Adobe Illustrator. I'm just kind of showing this for people who might have experience with this particular program. So here's I'm inside Adobe Illustrator right now. And you can see that I have multiple layers here. I have the body, I have the hands, and then I have the face as separate layers here. I'm going to bring this into, or we're going to import this into Adobe Animate. I'm going to do that by going under File, Import, Import to Library. And what I'm going to do is go to Illustrator and click on that. Oops, there it is. So it's also going to give me kind of a similar kind of situation here, like we got for the raster image. So this is showing me all of the layers that are coming in through Illustrator. You can turn these on and off if you don't want to import all of them. If you want, you could convert this to a raster image. That's what import as bitmap would do. In this case, though, I want to be able to edit my drawing as a vector. So if you converted this to a bitmap, you would not be able to use any of the vector tools in Animate to do that. So I don't want to convert it to a bitmap. A bitmap means an image built out of pixels. This is kind of the same thing. Import as a single bitmap image. That would also do kind of something similar, where it would import everything as a raster or pixel-based drawing or image, which would not allow me to edit anything. Once again, you can decide whether you want to maintain these layers using animate layers, compress it all into one layer, or turn these layers into keyframes. I'm just going to keep this as one layer. Here is my Adobe Illustrator. This thing right here means it's a symbol, which we'll talk about in a second. And actually, if something is because these are vector-based, I can actually go in here and make changes to it. So for instance, I can select things, make changes to it. I wanted to use things like sub-selection tools to make changes and things like that. Or if I wanted to use like an eraser tool here, I can, go in and erase things like that. That is something that you would not be able to do if it was a raster based. And just like with the raster, I can resize it, shape it, scale it, rotate it, things like that. All right, so that is how you import items. Try importing the dog or the Photoshop.psd and the AI file into Adobe Animate.